I am thrilled to introduce Lynn Jurich as the opening keynote speaker for the GSB Climate Business and Innovation Summit today. Lynn Jurich is a renewable energy industry pioneer and entrepreneur. Lynn co-founded Sunrun, the leading provider of residential solar and energy storage systems, where she currently serves as co-executive chair. Before transitioning to her role of co-executive chair in 2021, Lynn served as Sunrun's chief executive officer for 7 years. Along with Sunrun co-founder Ed Fenster, Lynn invented the business model Solar as a Service, the other SaaS, that unlocked consumer demand for clean, affordable energy directly from residential rooftops. Lynn graduated from Stanford and began her career at Summit Partners, where she invested in the financial services and technology sectors. After Summit Partners, she earned her MBA from the Stanford Graduate School of Business and subsequently founded Sunrun. Lynn lives in the Bay Area with her husband and 2 children and remains involved here at the GSB, serving on the Stanford Graduate School of Business Advisory Council. And you may also recognize Lynn from around campus as a lecturer for the Formation of New Ventures class. As a lecturer, Lynn is known for serving as a mentor to Stanford students interested in careers in climate and entrepreneurship. Please join me in welcoming Lynn.
I'm so thrilled to be here. Teaching this course has been just unbelievable. I'm blown away every day by just how creative and how smart everybody is. And when Katie Lee, one of my students, asked me to present at this conference, I was like, yeah, no problem. And then 2 days later, when I got the confirmation, I found out this was like a 45-minute speech. I went to executive chair, as we talked about, so I'm a little out of the flow of, my speech writers and my public speaking, so I put this together myself. So this is some new material. You guys are gonna see it for the first time. You'll definitely notice that the slides are not as elegant as they might be, but I know what I'm talking about, so I'm thrilled to be here. And the other thought I had when I was preparing this was, this would be a lot easier if this was the fireside chat kind of format. So I decided I'm just going to do that myself. So today, I'm going to play moderator, and I'm going to play panelist. Okay, so first question. All right, so Lynn, you could have stayed on the low-risk, high-reward private equity path you started before business school. Why have you been grinding it out for the last 15 years with Sunrun? Good question. We'll get into that, definitely. But what I want to start with first is, what are the big things I'm hoping that people take away from the conversation today? And it's really 2 things. It's really about a consumer-led revolution here and about this sense of abundance. Those are the 2 things that I hope we continue to remember all the way when we get into the meat of the discussion. Also, did you guys notice I didn't actually answer the moderator's question? So that's another tip. I just saved you guys media training. So when you're a CEO and you do a lot of media, you figure out you just kind of answer the question you want to answer. So lesson number 1. Okay, so one of the things that's happened over the last couple of years is that many of us are now optimistic about decarbonizing energy. So it's kind of a new and exciting position to be in. We actually have a plan about how to decarbonize, and that's really thanks to the huge cost reductions we've seen in solar and wind, in electrifying our machines and batteries. And the IRA certainly helps us outline that path and how the US is going to help lead us to get there by 2050. I think there are, a couple challenging sectors still to decarbonize. I see a clean hydrogen entrepreneur in the front row. Hello. But I think there's pretty broad agreement about what we need to do and the tools that we need to use to get there. But I think there's one aspect that is wildly unappreciated, and that is the critical role that the consumer can play in this, and how distributed resources can play in this, and really how big and how fast this segment can scale when we get the political and the regulatory barriers out of the way. So from a numbers standpoint, here's why this is important. So 42% of our energy emissions are decisions that we make at home. So these are, you know, how we heat the air and water in our house, our cars that we drive, how we cook. And so every single, we continue to buy each one of these machines today, and there are about 1 billion of them. So the challenge that we have for us today is that we actually need 1 billion of these machines to be running on clean electricity. So when you break this up, it's about 550 million devices that currently run on fossil fuels, and about 430, the need for about 430 clean solar systems, batteries, and electric panels. So how we get to this billion. And one of the things that's a little bit discouraging about this is if we just look at the existing fossil burning machines that we have in our homes today, just depreciating them actually kind of gets us to the 1% to 2% degree. So this is really, really critical that we get this right and we appreciate the pace at which we need to get this right. The good news is that, this just gives you a sense, again, for the scale. So huge business opportunity for those of you guys in the crowd when you think about the amount of homes that we need to switch over to clean electricity. It's 500,000 homes need to be cleanly electrified every month for the next 25 years. So it's just an enormous market for us. Because of the IRA, each homeowner actually has an electric bank account to go do this, to actually make it affordable. And when you actually look and run the numbers, one of the nonprofits I'm involved with, Rewiring America, did some math on this, and they found out that the average American spends about $5,000 on energy costs for their home and transportation. If they moved it to all electric, the average savings would be about $1,800. So it's actually affordable. And that's not even to mention any of the other benefits like, clean air benefits, quieter machines. I often, every time I hear one of those really loud leaf blowers, I'm like, there are other benefits to this, to like electrically run machines. If I don't have to listen to one of those ever again, I'd be like thrilled. Other benefits certainly are around the good paying jobs that we create in our community, the healthier air, as I mentioned, and of course the huge climate benefits. So this all adds up to a huge amount of savings, which would be $12 trillion worldwide. And so I always ask myself, why don't people know this? And why aren't we moving faster? Because this is a very abundant future and one that can be led by consumers. So I think there are 4 reasons that I believe we're not moving faster. And the first one is mindset. The second one is financing. So one of the factors about green equipment is that it's more expensive up front, but it's less expensive over time because the fuel is free, of course. So there's a financing problem to hurdle to overcome. The third is many of the incumbents are afraid of this future. It's threatening and it's change. And then the fourth is political and regulatory friction. So I'm going to get into each one of these and why I'm optimistic that we can actually overcome them. So moderator wants to know. Moderator wants to know. I get most of these, but what do you mean about mindset? Okay. So this idea that the clean energy future can actually be an abundant one is relatively new. And I was really pleased actually to hear Elon in the latest Tesla Investor Day, he used that word as well. I kind of looked to this friend of mine and a fellow climate advocate, Saul Griffith. He says something which I think is spot on, which is for the last 50 years, the environmental movement has basically been telling us all about energy efficiency. So if we just have cleaner, slightly cleaner machines, which means colder houses, which means smaller cars, which means slower cars, we might help the climate a little bit. And that's like a very discouraging message. And I think also similarly with the idea of a carbon tax. Again, I think anytime you use that word tax, things get really politicized. So I get the benefit of why people have really been advocating for a carbon tax. I think people haven't wanted to pick the technological winners. And I think that's no longer relevant because we know we have to move fast. We have wind, solar, and batteries. That's going to be the bulk of what we need to do. So, let's go. And so I think if we, the way that the IRA was drafted with this direct subsidy mechanism, I think is a really, really smart way to go. I'm actually really pleased about that. Because I think when you go the other way with a sort of tax regime or really focusing on energy efficiency, you get to really misguided policy choices like subsidizing or incentivizing slightly better fossil burning machines. So I don't think that's the end game. So my first recommendation for us, my recommendation for today is number one, don't mess around with subsidizing a little bit better fossil burning machines. We already know we need to get to 1 billion clean machines. That's the end game. The end game needs to be electric machines that run on clean electricity. So let's, it's confusing when you muddle that. So let's align all of our interests to that end goal and focus on it. And then I think the second recommendation is let's continue to talk about this as an abundant future. This is a clean energy future for consumers, is higher performing, it's more comfortable, and it's more cost effective. Okay, so that's first. Okay, moderator, switching gears, Lynn. Give us a couple-minute overview of founding Sunrun and where you are today. So I was, here back in 2007 with Ed Fenster, and like we study in our Formation of New Ventures class, a lot of businesses are started when there's an inflection point in the industry or where there's a big technological change. And I think we saw that with solar. Of course, the cost was continuing to come down, but what was more interesting to us was that the solar, what we thought was actually disruptive was the fact that solar could be micro. So it was the first time really where energy wasn't really necessarily had to be large-scale infrastructure. You could actually site it locally, and we truly believe that this would be the most efficient source of power over time because the sun is free, and because if you can actually produce it where it's consumed, you have a lot less expense and waste in transporting the energy. So I think Thomas Edison even also sort of shared that point of view. And so we, at that time, back in 2007, the state of California had a nice subsidy. I think it was Arnold Schwarzenegger. Remember when he was governor, he had like a goal of 1 million solar roofs for California. And actually at the time, that was seen as a total moonshot and that we would never hit that. And we, in fact, have, which I'm pleased to share. But so there was a nice subsidy, and so solar actually looked like it had a pretty good payback for consumers. And we believe that it would hit that grid parity first at the consumer level because consumers pay the most money for power. So we believe that this really was a financing problem because most consumers, they're interested in it. They like the idea of locking in their free power for the next 20, 30 years. And they like this idea of controlling their energy, controlling their future and having that energy security. And so as Katie and the team mentioned, we invented this model called solar as a service. And the theory was, okay, we'll hit grid parity first. And once we figure it out and get the flywheel going, this actually will scale faster than large-scale infrastructure. And we can build a business with a better entry barrier where we can build a brand, where we can build consumer distribution. And so that was the theory. So we went out and we raised $12 million pretty quickly. This was 2007, so it was before the recession. And it was a challenging start because we had a really big chicken and an egg problem where we needed to pay for these solar systems for consumers because we were buying them. So this was $50,000 a pop. And then the consumers were signing up for a 20-year contract. And so in order to get enough of those 20-year contracts and enough cash flows to be of interest to a bank, we had to front all that cash. So we were just burning through our $12 million of venture capital. It's quite stressful, but it's still 2007, so we have a lot of good term sheets for the debt to actually finance against these cash flows. Then all of a sudden, the financial market crashes. So we were, in a moment, and I will tell you, I think every CEO that you guys hear from, most anyway, will say that there are moments, so many moments where the company had certain death coming. And that was it for us. And I think we looked at our venture capitalists and thought, oh my goodness, so like we spent all this equity capital. And by the way, those early customers probably thought we were going to go out of business and they would get the system for free, to be honest. And so we just were miraculously got our first $40 million financing closed, like in 2008, in the nadir of the financial crisis. And I think US Bank was the lender in that, and they weren't exposed as much to subprime, so they still had the capital available. But I am so loyal to that bank for the rest of my life. And just a lesson for those of you guys that start a company during a recession, because we were able to get that done, it gave us a really big head start, actually, because not a lot of other people were able to go out and raise capital. So it kind of, as stressful as it was, it definitely aged me, but it worked out. So just a couple things. So first, and our initial vision for the business was, we thought this would be pretty asset light. We're the capital. So there was a bunch of solar installers out there. They would be doing the construction and selling the homeowner. We would raise the capital and own these systems and monitor these systems, but we would just be securitizing these cash flows. So we'd have a couple, employees, and we'd just raise the money. Well, very wrong, very wrong. So about 5 to 6 years in, we realized we had to get into the construction ourselves. The quality wasn't there, the scaling wasn't there, the cost structure wasn't there, and so we ended up purchasing one of our larger solar installers and integrating that into the business. We also ended up needing to raise hundreds of millions of dollars before our IPO. So if I sort of tallied up, almost 500 million probably of equity capital. So it turned out to be quite a capital-intensive business. And then 3 years ago, we did a $3 billion acquisition of the second largest solar installer and financier in the US. And so I was just thinking about it this morning on my way up. 2 years ago, I had moved my family to Utah to integrate those 3,000 employees. So it turned out to be, here we are today, 10,000 people, raised a lot of capital to get to where we are. But so very wrong on the asset light side, but very right on the fact that the cost of the solar would continue to improve and that customers want this. So the cost of solar, you all probably know this, but it's 10% where it was when we started the company, which is just incredible. And I'm so proud of what the team accomplished last year. We installed 1 gigawatt of power last year. So that is the size of a nuclear power plant. And we did that last year. So the thesis very much around this can actually scale and this can be a meaningful power source, really definitely came true. It does really start to feel like we're at this tipping point where consumers sort of have a prepared mind for solar and they accept it. I think if you just look at the growth rate and consumer adoption for it, for us last year, we grew 25% year over year in new installs, which actually was quite a bit faster than the previous years. So it does very much feel like we're reaching this inflection point. The other thing I would say is in 2017, another technology change happened, which was batteries. And we saw that and we said, okay, this is going to completely revolutionize the industry. And so Sunrun became the leader in battery adoption as well. So we have about 50,000 batteries. I'll get into this more in the future and why this is so critical. But today, about 15% of our customers are adding a battery with the solar system. And I think that's set to dramatically increase. And the addition of the battery is another reason why I'm so convinced that the consumer is going to help lead this energy transition. Because the battery opens up this whole new business model where you can actually dispatch that power into the grid, not just for your own home to store it, but also in this world of creating these virtual power plants for the benefits of our neighbors. So I'll pause there for the moderator. Okay, moderator. You talk about building 2 infrastructures. What do you mean by that? So when I look at this, one of the things that I worry about is, okay, we have this centralized infrastructure on the left. And we're continually, of course, investing in this. This is kind of managed by the utilities and the regulators. And we're about to put massive amount of investment into this. At the same time, we have this consumer-sided set of resources that are coming in there. And the two aren't necessarily talking to each other. And so in my mind, and I think when we're making decisions on this centralized infrastructure, we're looking backwards. We tend to look backwards. And we're not necessarily anticipating, hey, how fast are the assets growing on this direct-to-consumer side? How fast are consumers actually putting their own power and their own battery capacity and increasingly their own electric vehicles with even larger batteries into their home? So what I worry about is that if these two aren't planned in connection and concert, that we actually take too long, longer than necessary, and we could potentially overbuild each one of these systems. So, the current centralized system is a little bit of a mess. So here are a few facts. So if you look at the first bullet point here, so in 2021, the US utility spent over $125 billion in CapEx, which was more than 2 times depreciation expense. And I don't just share that to make a point that I did pass out of the accounting requirement for the GSB, but it's the challenge is that we are actually pretty behind in even just keeping up with our existing infrastructure. And because if you look at the cost of electricity, so look at these years, if you think about back in 2008, this was before natural gas started getting really cheap. So when you looked at your power bill back in 2008, 2/3 of the cost of your bill was the fuel, and 1/3 was the actual infrastructure. So fast forward now, it's the opposite. 2/3 of your bill is the infrastructure, and 1/3 is the fuel, because the fuel is a lot cheaper from things like cheaper gas and renewables, et cetera. Yet, utility rates continue to increase through that whole time period. So what's happened is that, today more than 70% of our transmission lines are over 25 years old. So utilities are going to have to spend just trillions of dollars to actually just keep the existing system working. And one of the other, dynamics that we need to be aware of is that the business model of utilities is also they make more money the more of this stuff they build. And so we'll get into that, why that's a challenge again for these two systems to be built together, because the utility is not making money off of the resources that are at the consumer side. But those resources at the consumer side are just going to keep growing and growing faster and faster because the cost dynamics dictate it, and then we'll get into reliability and why that also will drive it. Because if you look at just power prices in this last year, they're up 15% year over year. So a few of them here, I think, nationwide, it was 7% up in January versus the previous year. PG&E asked for 18% increase, and in Florida, 12%. So this dynamic is making it, one, painful for consumers, and two, increasing the value proposition for consumers. So, bottom line is we got some work to do. And the grid just wasn't really built for this new reality of climate change and consumer demands. So home batteries are becoming increasingly appealing to people. So if you just look today, even today, adding a battery with solar is cheaper than the utility in many places. So this is just looking at a cut of a monthly bill. So if you look at, these are the components at the right. For a customer who goes, buys a solar as a service plan with a battery, the component of their bill now for solar would be $158, battery $29, and then the existing power they continue to buy that's not served by their system is $12. So that's $200 per month, whereas the utility is $258. So already, this is more cost-effective for consumers without spending money up front and getting the added benefit of resiliency. And so just, I thought this was kind of fun. This is just showing our grid, our customers in Southern California. You can see all the yellow lights are the solar customers, and the purple are the ones with batteries. So you see the potential here. Here are just some of the success stories. And if we look at the California heat wave last year, The regulators actually called us when they knew that they were at risk of having some of the rolling power outages and asked us, hey, can you do us a favor basically and dispatch these batteries at this window when we're going to be short power? And we did. And again, it would be nice to have a mechanism where you can actually coordinate that and get paid for it. But we actually dispatched it, and it was even at our smaller scale now, it was about the equivalent of a small gas power plant. Then you look at just customers in Florida, in Puerto Rico, even in Texas. When they had the Arctic freeze, we had customers there where their batteries powered the home for 50 hours straight. So even in the winter, so the solar would charge up the battery during the day, they would use the battery at night. And once consumers go through that, they go through those sort of outages, increasingly with COVID, where people are home more and using more power. This resiliency benefit is just so significant. So in Texas, for example, I believe when those Arctic freeze happened, I think our website traffic went up like 350%. It was just huge awareness for what batteries can do. So where we are today is, I think, more than half of our battery customers have had an outage. So again, they're starting to see real benefits from this. And we provided, I think, 22,000 days of backup power to the customers. So, so shouldn't we, we're not going to stop consumers from buying this stuff. So we should coordinate it and actually use it. And I think one of the things that has held people back in the past is I think people have been afraid, well, it's kind of small, it's a lot of work, and are these really going to be meaningful resources? And I think we're starting to prove that they actually are. The consumer interest is there at very high penetration. So if you look at just penetration, and you look at places like Hawaii is a place where power prices were very expensive, a lot of sun. So the value proposition was very strong there first. And you can see that there's no axis here, but the penetration rate for Hawaii is about 30-ish% of households, and 100% of customers in Hawaii are adding a battery. So that sort of shows you the future of where it goes as the value proposition gets stronger. And you see California is somewhere around 10-ish%, and then the rest of the US is only 4%. So we were really, about 5 or 6 years ago, we started to see this opportunity and started to pioneer these ideas of these virtual power plants. And particularly we noticed it in Hawaii, because our customers in Hawaii, they ended net metering, and I won't get into net metering in this conversation because we could talk about it for a long time, but effectively the utility said, we have too much solar, we won't take any more back on the grid. So if you want to put a solar system on, you have to add a battery, store the power yourself. So we started doing that 100% of our customers, solar plus adding the battery, storing it, and the home was just consuming the power of that battery. And we kept on saying to the regulators, this is crazy. The whole energy system is built on this peak power need. If we actually coordinated, we could actually dispatch at the peak time, and it would be way more cost effective for everybody. And so we've launched, Sunrun has launched 14-ish of these programs, but I would say it's been slow going. And this is one of the things, this is one of my other recommendations, is let's speed this up. Let's make it more simple to enroll. Let's make the benefit to the consumer easier to understand. And I think the pain that we're feeling in California is actually going to drive this faster. So if you think about, we just announced this program with PG&E. And so for 7,500 customers for this summer, each one of these customers is going to get $750. To allow the utility to dispatch their battery. Think about that, for one summer, for a battery. That's how cost effective these batteries can be, both for the consumer and for the grid. And now you feel good because you've invested in your home, but this battery and through this program, it will be the equivalent of providing the power for your own home, but also 2 to 3 of your neighbors. So this is my third, I guess, recommendation is have these two systems talk to each other. And one of the things that we have to do is we have to make the incentives for the utilities to want the two systems to talk to each other. Because the way the current business model works, of course, is if they're not building their own infrastructure, they don't get to earn a return on that. So I'm pretty excited about this program, actually. Okay. Moderator. What does the moderator want to ask? Okay. What about the future of other electrification products, excuse me. Okay, so batteries. Very excited about that and the promise of virtual power plants. Now we also have electric vehicles. And I think that a lot of these stats you guys are probably familiar with, but I think just worth thinking about in this context of this consumer-led revolution. So 80% of EV owners would want to install solar panels, and most of their owners do that charging at home. And keep in mind that that car battery is about 3 times bigger than what that stationary battery actually is. So there's a lot of opportunity here. And in fact, what Sunrun has done is we partnered with Ford on the F-150. So we co-developed a bidirectional inverter with Ford so that you could actually use your truck to back up your house. And the battery has enough power in it that if you're sort of smart about how you do it, you can back it up for 4 days. It's pretty significant. But getting back to regulatory constraints, so just to share a few reasons of how we're getting in our own way on all this stuff. So one is, okay, now that we know the home can have capacity enough to actually push back into the grid at peak times and benefit everybody, we should be using as much roof space as possible, right? I mean, if you look at the IRA and some of these forecasts, people are really worried about, the amount of land we're going to actually need to put up all this solar to meet our targets is the equivalent of Rhode Island, Connecticut, and I think Massachusetts altogether is their forecast. But we have 21 million acres of rooftops. And the cheapest incremental power you could ever add on the system is incremental panels on a home rooftop. Because you've already spent the money to do the permit to get someone on the roof. So if you add an extra couple kW onto that roof, that's the cheapest form of power we can add into our system. And by the way, we need double the power with electric vehicles, and only 40% of our power right now is clean. So we're going to need even more than that. So we need the capacity on the system. But right now, how the rules are written in many places, you're limited to only put enough solar on your roof for how much power you use. Even if you say, I want to buy an electric vehicle or 2 electric vehicles. Example of a very silly rule. Another silly rule will be, we want to change all these devices into electric devices at home. Now, but the way the utility thinks about that is when they size your electric panel, they say, we're going to assume every one of those devices is running at the same time. And so then that becomes very cumbersome to actually have to upgrade that panel and wait for that to happen and the expense of actually doing that. When actually we have software solutions that could shift the load and curtail that. And so another example is, we need to do meter inspections. I recall, this is probably like 2 years ago, hopefully they fixed this, but in Southern California, Edison, there was no online system. It was a phone queue to get an appointment to upgrade your meter. It was a 7-hour wait. And we would have to do 10 to 15 of those a day. So another example, because I'm going to get to my recommendation about get rid of these stupid rules. Another example, you want to install a battery in your house, but the fire department won't let you put it in your garage because they're worried about fires. Yeah, safety is a real concern, certainly. But your electric vehicle has the same battery 3 times larger in your garage. So these are the kind of things we just have to get out of our own way. So that's one of my recommendations, number 4, get rid of the dumb rules. Because it takes too long to do this stuff. So using the Ford example, this bidirectional inverter that provides the truck with the backup power, most customers want that. And it's not inexpensive. It's, I think, $8,000 or $9,000. But majority of customers want to sign up for that until they realize it goes on the solar timeline, which is like a 3-month to 6-month, permitting sort of timeline. And then it's sort of like, I lose interest. I need my charger right away. I'm not going to bother with that. So again, lots of well-meaning rules that just no longer serve this new world of distributed resources. So we got to get it out of the way. Okay, I have 10 minutes left here. Okay, moderator. I heard you helped start another company to help advance home electrification called Lunar Energy. What's that about and why is it separate from Sunrun? So Lunar, I'm super excited, this is a company where once we recognized the importance of batteries, we realized that most battery suppliers were not serving this stationary battery market. They're mostly all focused on the electric vehicle market. And we also anticipated that there could be some supply chain problems with this. So we partnered with SK, which is a large Korean conglomerate, and they're one of the battery suppliers for the Ford F-150 as well. And so we set up this company to actually build, electrification products for the home. The first product will really be an integrated battery, inverter, and software product. And we wanted to start it as a separate company because it's really a hardware software business, which is very different from Sunrun, which is more of a tech-enabled services business. And we also saw that it was a huge global opportunity. And so while the company was in stealth over the last 2 years, we also acquired the leading software provider for virtual power plants, and called Moixa in the UK. And this software company is going to be integrated into this battery product, but it's also open. It's device agnostic. And it's already operating 35,000 batteries in Japan and actually creating virtual power plant type programs in Japan. So super excited about this business. They'll be launching commercially this year. And really excited that I am just chair of this. I'm not operating it, so it's fun. So, okay, recommendation number 5. Buy products from Sunrun and Lunar. Okay. I'm still a founder CEO, so I got to get in there. Okay, and I am going to let the moderator ask one more question. So what else are you excited about? So I'm also very excited about the IRA. Like I said, I think they got it right with this direct subsidy mechanism. I think one of the other things that really got right was really focusing on disadvantaged communities. And so there's the added tax credit adder in community for low-income multifamily and for in communities where they've been actually adversely affected by fossils. And I think that's just a perfect place for the government to continue to really invest in, so we make sure this transition is equitable. It's also another place that's very fraught with, we put too much friction in the system to actually make it work. So we're actually working with Treasury right now on some of these programs where it's taking, I think, way longer to sort of set this up and roll it, verify it. And, in my opinion, we have to go fast. We have to take a little bit of risk in some of this stuff for to sort of see the bigger picture. The other thing I worry about a little bit is it's very focused on this large scale. And this is why I think I'm going to be out there advocating these consumer-sided resources. The consumer side is a huge part of the solution. If you just look at the forecast for next year, the utility scale solar for 2023 we're expected to put in 10 gigawatts. Residential is 5 gigawatts, and it's growing faster. So, and I do give Secretary Granholm, the Secretary of Energy, she's fantastic. She's very pragmatic. She's very practical. I think she very much appreciates this. But there are these complications where, with labor in particular, where the large-scale infrastructure is unionized labor, whereas the small-scale stuff, if you're under a gigawatt, is not. And this has a lot of political elements to it. Which can be a little fraught, and we know we're going to be so short labor, millions of people short to actually get all this stuff done. And the other thing I worry about is just the United States broadly has lost the skill set to develop large-scale infrastructure. It's we got to get there. I think we will get there, but just look at the Bay Bridge or the Big Dig or these nuclear power plants. It's it's not a skill set. We just haven't done it as a country for a long time. And so once again, let's have the two systems talk to each other. Let's focus on this consumer side of stuff that can scale just as fast and align our programs behind that. And I think, there was, the IRA, I think, again, mostly gets it right, but there are places where you can sort of see that it sort of leans a little bit more towards this large-scale infrastructure stuff. Like heat pumps, for example, I think were really under-subsidized. So heat pumps, I think, are getting about 10% credit for the cost when I think we could, go quite a bit further. So those are my primary recommendations. I think, one of the other things I was going to talk about, but I think I'm out of time here, is, I encourage people anytime you can help get involved to streamline some of these processes. Any business ideas you have around construction tech, I think, are super interesting. I know I've talked to a couple people who are really trying to make labor more efficient, make large-scale construction more efficient. I think these are sort of the bottlenecks right now. Is like, how do we do infrastructure well in this country, and how do we just get out of our own way with the frictions that are unnecessary, that are outdated, and don't serve us anymore? So that's what I'll leave you guys with. Thanks.